Hey friends, welcome to the MPL Weekly, coming to you live from Burbank, California. Today we're gonna go over the weekly matches from the Magic Pro League players, talk to you about what we found most exciting. So I'm Becca Scott, I'm here with Paul Chian and Maria Bertoldi. TH. Oh, hi guys.
Hi.
Welcome. It's so great to have you here. Now, friends at home, this is a very interesting format that we're doing. What's happening here is our pro players are competing for a top spot in the top 16 of our next Arena Mythic Championship tournament. So there are 4 divisions of players here, 8 each, of course, because there are 32 players in the MPL throughout a total of 5 weeks. And right now we're into week 3. Players will play the other players in their bracket. Out of those, there's going to be 1 winner in each division. They're going to get a bye straight to day 2, the top 16 of the next championship. That's going to be in Vegas in the end of June. And every winner of every match is going to get 2 mythic points. These mythic points just show us the standings of how our pros are doing.
Right. The mythic points are actually going to be used to determine who gets to play in the World Championships at the end of the year. So even if you're mathematically eliminated from potentially making the top 16, you still want to win every single match to acquire those mythic points for the end of the year.
Yes, and we've seen such exciting decks. It's really cool to be here on the front lines watching these games be played. And I want to talk a little bit about the meta game, because last week we saw a lot of Bant mid-range, and this week it looks like decks evolving around Command the Dread Horde are really, really popular. So how did that come about?
So the metagame has been shifting from week to week, and it's been fascinating to see. This week by itself, we've seen 16 unique decks being represented, and people have shifted because the deck of last week was the Bant mid-range deck, and now everybody's trying to figure out how to go over the top of each other. And the thing that people have chosen to do this week is go with Command the Dread Horde.
I'm so excited, Paul. I've been playing this deck almost nonstop on Arena. It is my all-time favorite. It's so stupid, but it's also so fun, and it's ridiculously powerful.
Yeah, absolutely, because it does play your typical normal mid-range strategy where you're playing a bunch of threats, you have some planeswalkers, but then the late game, you get to 6 mana, you get to the first person to cast Command the Dread Horde in the kind of the mid-range matchups is a person who's going to come out on top.
And we'll talk more about that card as we see it. But right now, let's look at the standings at the beginning of week 3. So this is week 2 standings. And how does this field look to you?
Well, so we're now 2 weeks in. We're almost at the midway point. So now we get to kind of see the separation in some of the players here. We have, a bunch of 3-0s here and also some 0-3s. So players who are 0-3, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to actually be able to win their division. But, if you look, players like SETH, MANFIELD, and Martin Juza, they're in really, really good position here to, kind of put them further ahead of the pack to try to win that coveted slot into the top 16 of Mythic Championship.
And you might know this, I'm the Ruby division correspondent, so there's a soft spot in my heart for Ruby, but you'll also notice I have 2 players in my division now currently sitting at 0-0. They are the new additions. We've got Savich and Jessica Estefan, so I'm super excited to see them play next week.
Yeah, absolutely, and keep in mind, these are new additions to the event, so they have some matches that are going to be made up, We haven't, of course, been able to get them to play those matches yet, but they will be able to have an opportunity
They'll do some catching up.
Exactly, so they can still be the winners of their split.
Right, because in these 5 weeks, each player is going to play 7 matches, yeah?
Right, exactly.
Awesome.
And the reason why there are 7 matches is because we need to, ultimately have a winner, and we determined that, in order to have the right number of matches, we can't just have 5 weeks of matches being able to determine the winner, so we added a couple of extra matches. So
you did the maths.
We did the maths, and so you're going to see some disparities here. You're going to see some people sitting at a 3-0 record and some people sitting at a 1-3 record, and that's because in some of the weeks, some of the players will have to play more than 1 match.
Awesome. Well, let's take a look at this first head-to-head. We have Brad Nelson playing against Martin Juza. Brad's been playing since 2004, Juza since 2000, and a lot of top finishes for both, or a good number. And they're both 3-0, undefeated in our MPL Weekly. So Brad's playing the Selesnya Tokens, and Martin is playing the Mono-Red Aggro. Let's hop over to Brad's deck list.
All right, here we go. Selesnya Tokens, Paul. This is a unique choice to bring to this week, but don't look down on Brad ever when it comes to Standard. This guy is a metagame hawk, you might say, and this decision pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of an oldie but a goodie. This is a deck that kind of came out really from the Convoke mechanic through Guilds of Ravnica, but we really haven't seen a whole lot of it. But Brad Nelson bringing it back here with a couple of new additions here. We have Gideon Blackblade, as you see in the corner, but the card I really want to talk about is the Immortal Sun.
I love it. I
the
love it,
Immortal
Paul.
Sun. Getting up to 6 mana to cast the Immortal Sun completely shuts down those Jeskai Planeswalker decks that we've seen kind of rising in popularity. And this is a huge metagame decision from Brad Nelson because we've seen Planeswalkers all over the place. It's in the four-color
infestation.
Absolutely. And somebody needs to clean it up. And Brad Nelson chose the Immortal Sun here to lock down all the Planeswalker abilities. But keep in mind, it also has other very relevant pieces of text here. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Great in a go-wide strategy. And, of course, being able to draw an extra card every single turn is also quite strong.
Do you think we're going to see more Immortal Suns in the Azorius decks popping up?
I think we're just going to see more Immortal Sun overall.
Generally.
With all the Planeswalkers being played
And
here.
not
Here's
only the
Brad's
Immortal
sideboard.
Sun, Sorcerer's Spyglass, so he's not done hating on Planeswalkers.
Yeah, absolutely. Brad Nelson, again, realizing that Planeswalkers is the name of the game currently. Not a big surprise with War of the Spark having all kinds of different Planeswalkers seeing play. We have Sorcerer's Spyglass as an excellent way to deal with Planeswalkers, along with Prison Realm, which kind of doubles as removal spell for creatures, but also just an additional way to deal with walkers.
And let's hop over to Yuza's deck. This is just your standard Mono-Red Aggro that we've seen very popular lately.
Yeah, and the only difference here that you see is people have now adopted CHANDRA Fire Artisan as an additional 4-mana card advantage engine in the deck. Before, we used to see 4 copies of Experimental Frenzy, but now people are choosing to play CHANDRA, and right now it's still unclear what the balance is between how many Frenzies you want to play and how many CHANDRAs you want to play, and it really just comes down to the removal spells that people are playing in the format.
And no matter what, now we've got 5 cards essentially doing what Experimental Frenzy was doing, so it's a higher number than we've seen in the past.
And here's Martin's sideboard.
Yeah, and taking a look at the sideboard, Martin going with more copies of Frenzy in the sideboard, so he can sideboard up to potentially 7 4-mana cards that get you ahead on cards. And then another card that I want to talk about is those 3 copies of Tybalt Rakish Instigator, as it has that static. I think that's the most important part about Tybalt, is the fact that it has that line of text, your opponents can't gain life.
Which might be super relevant in this matchup.
Absolutely. Brad Nelson playing the Selesnya Tokens deck, relying on cards like March of the Multitudes, which generates a ton of lifelink tokens, and that's going to single-handedly shut off all of that life gain that the Selesnya Tokens deck can put together. So I think Tybalt is probably a card that you're going to see do a lot of work in this matchup.
Well, I'm excited to see if Tybalt gets sideboarded in Game 2, but right now let's head into Game 1. This is Brad Nelson and Martin Juza.
All right, here we go. Martin Juza, we're going to be taking a look at his hand here. Paul, what do you like for Mono-Red? Is this a good hand?
It's got lands, it's got spells,
All right,
it's got
let's do it.
Steamkin. Easy keep in just about every single matchup here.
Mountain for Martin Juza passes the turn back over to Brad Nelson, who looks like he might be dropping Amaria's Soul of the Accord here, one of the key cards for the Selesnya Tokens deck. As you mentioned, kind of a blast from the past, people playing this a few months ago in Standard, bringing it back here.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's going to eat a shock here. It's a very tidy way for Martin to get the tempo back in his favor. Going to be firing off a shock and following that up with a runaway Steamkin here on turn 2. And, you know, the Selesnya deck doesn't have a lot of removal. It only plays Conclave Tribunal as a way to get the Steamkin off the threat. And, you know, we've seen Steamkin do some really, really silly things. It can really get out of hand.
All right, History of Benalia there for Brad Nelson is going to start creating some 2/2 Night tokens, but Martin has answers that line up so well with the mana cost that Brad is sinking into his threats. Here's a shock.
Yeah, so we're going to see a shock here from Martin Juza, targeting the token. Then we're going to see an attack with the Runaway Steamkin for 2. I imagine he's going to keep that shock and Lightning Strike in hand for future threats. Then he's going to be able to follow that up with a Light Up the Stage. And if you notice, he's not playing the land from his hand because there is the possibility of hitting multiple lands off of Light Up the Stage. So you want to make sure that you get those lands out of the way first before you play the ones out of your hand.
How about a Light Up the Stage into another Light Up the Stage here, Paul?
Yeah, and this is getting pretty ridiculous because now we're going to get that third counter. Crucial third counter on the Runaway Steamkin, and now Martin Juza has all the mana in the world here.
This just seems unfair at this point, but this is exactly what Red wants to do.
Exactly, and that's a third Light Up the Stage. So now Martin can use the mana here, play another Light Up the Stage. If he does find additional creatures or threats to play, he can continue just putting them all on the battlefield. But it looks like he's going for a Chain Whirler here instead.
Goblin Chain Whirler can really do some work against a deck that has tokens in the name, but no 1/1s on the board yet for Brad Nelson for Chain Whirler to clean up. But there's Conclave Tribunal for the draw that you mentioned earlier as his one-piece removal.
Yeah, this is interesting. So Martin could go, Brad Nelson could choose to go for Conclave Tribunal here to get that Steamkin off the board. He sees all those cards exiled from Light Up the Stage, or he could just run out of Venerate the Loxodon. And the reason to run out the Loxodon here is its toughness. It's really important. 4 is extremely important against the mono-red deck because all the damage that the mono-red deck can do is in increments of 3.
Right.
Lightning Strike, and you have cards like Shock, Wizard's Lightning. They all do 3 damage. Nothing can deal 4. So in order for Martin Juza to get that Loxodon off the battlefield, he's going to need to use multiple removal spells to get it off. So it's an excellent blocker here.
All right, so back over to Martin Juza here. 3 mana at the ready, a couple of Goblin Chain Whirlers in hand. Looks like a Lightning Strike is going to be what he wants to fire off first.
And he's going to do it. He's going to fire off multiple removal spells
check it
here.
out. Respect the elephant, Paul.
The elephant in the room is now going to be gone. We're gonna see a Shock and a Lightning Strike. 2 removal spells here, but Martin Juza here looking really, really good here. Getting in for 7, and now again, Steamkin. Yeah, Steamkin on 3 counters. We're gonna see that Light Up the Stage be cast. There can be all kinds of goodies here.
All right, here we go. Light Up the Stage gets another 2 cards in hand for Martin Juza. Get 2 Lava Runner and another Lightning Strike. By the way, Brad Nelson's life total, 10.
Right, and he's going to use this Lightning Strike here. History Benalia is going to go to Chapter 3, turning that into a 5/4 Vigilance Knight token. And that traditionally what you want to do against the tokens deck is basically get all the creatures off the board as quickly as possible because you want to kind of shut down their Convoke. So I think Lightning Strike makes a lot of sense here on the token, but it looks like Martin's opting for a Gitu Lava Runner here instead. But he would be losing out on 1 mana here because he has currently 2 mana in his mana pool with that Runaway Steamkin.
So what would be the upside here of playing the Lava Runner, do you think?
Maybe saving the Lightning Strike for another threat that could come off the top here for Brad Nelson.
All right, so it is going to be the Lava Runner. We're going to take up that Steamkin as well in the process. Back over to Brad Nelson. History of Benalia is going to pop. That Knight turns into a 5/4 Vigilance Attacker.
You know, I think maybe he's trying to induce Brad Nelson to running out a main phase large March of the Multitudes. That could be a reason that I can see him doing this, because if he does get Brad to run it out main phase here after the attack,
it's gonna be terrible.
He can now follow that up with Goblin Chain Whirler to kill all the tokens, and then he can still use the mana with the Runaway Steamkin to get that Lightning Strike to finish off the 5/4 token here.
Well, if that was Yuza's plan, Nelson is not going to bite. Conclave Tribunal takes out the Runaway Steamkin. But here's a Lightning Strike to deal with the 3/3 Knight token, and we are getting in for half of Nelson's life total here. A hit for 5 will knock him down to 5. Lightning Strike in hand. Remember, with the red, if you're playing against red, you can never be too confident about what your life total is at any given moment.
Yeah, and things are very, very tough here for Brad Nelson. I mean, he's got March of the Multitudes. Theoretically, is a decent card in the matchup here. But keep in mind, he's already sitting at 4, and Martin's got multiple Goblin Chain Whirlers in hand to kind of clean up all of these tokens.
All right, so here we go, an attack once again. Everybody into the red zone for Martin Juza, and a March of the Multitudes here for Brad Nelson is going to make 3 1/1 lifelinkers to jump in front. But as you said, 2 Goblin Chain Whirlers in hand. Ugh.
Yeah, so Martin now has a decision whether or not he wants to use Lightning Strike here on the 1/1 token to save Gitu Lava Runner, but it looks like he's just going to let all of this resolve and probably just play out another Goblin Chain Whirler.
All right, so Nelson falling to 7 on that attack thanks to some lifelink, and there is another Goblin Chain Whirler for Martin Juza, and having a 3rd one in hand doesn't feel too bad about playing that one out there.
Yeah, and this is a lethal attack, and March of the Multitude is not going to be doing a great job at chump blocking here, or blocking, because Goblin Chain Whirler has first strike, so you can't even triple block here with the March of the Multitudes to get one of these Chain Whirlers off the battlefield.
Another March of the Multitudes for Brad Nelson makes 4 1/1s, and here they go. Chump block duty in front of the Chain Whirlers, but like you said, no life gain there, so Nelson stays at 6, but boom! Chain Whirler number 3 coming on in, and that is a concession! Martin Juza takes that game.
Yeah, and yeah, he's seen enough there. Multiple Chain Whirlers being played, and now, you know, taking a look here at the sideboard, there's lots of different options here. I imagine Knight of Autumn could be a strong option here, because not only does it kill Experimental Frenzy, which can get out of hand, it also is just a nice source to kind of buffer your life total.
Man, there's so many cards I haven't seen for a while. It's like a blast from the past. District Guide here in the sideboard for Brad Nelson.
Well, I think that was in the main, and he took it out.
Oh, he took
but
it out.
The reason why he's playing District Guide is he's playing the 2 copies of the Immortal Sun, so he just wants to make sure that he hits his land drops to get to number 6. So if you notice, he cut some of the Sapling migrations, which makes sense. You want to make your deck as immune to Goblin Chain Whirler as possible. So taking out some of those makes a lot of sense. It looks like he also took out the Legion's landings, and bringing in the Baffling Ends also makes a lot of sense because we saw Runaway Steamkin just kind of go off in that first game. So making sure that you have cheap answers to those creatures is really, really important. So he's bringing in the Baffling Ends. He also even brought in the Prison Realms as well, just to have answers to the CHANDRA Fire Artisan plan as well that comes out of the sideboard for the Mono-Red deck.
Let's take a peek at Martin Juza sideboarding here too. And there is Tybalt, Rakish Instigator, sitting in the board for Juza. It's not bringing in.
Oh, right. Interesting. So not caring about the lifelink. He's like, you know what? I don't care about 1/1 lifelink tokens. I got Goblin Chain Whirler.
Okay.
I'm just going to draw Goblin Chain Whirler, and we're just not going to worry about it.
All right, here we go. Game number 2. Martin Juza up a game over Brad Nelson. A 1-lander here. Not always a problem for Ed. We'll see what he decides to do.
Yeah, he's likely going to ship this one back. Not a lot of pressure, just a lot of removal spells and a Rekindling Phoenix. Oof, this is a nice one, though.
Yeah, great hand here on 6 for Martin Juza. Mountain, he's going to scry to the top. And you can see that Experimental Frenzy in hand, too.
Yeah, so oftentimes with the Mono-Red deck, you know, if you have 2 lands, you'll often bottom lands because you just want to make sure you keep drawing burn spells. But when you have Experimental Frenzy in your hand, that all changes. The entire game plan then becomes, I want to hit land number 4. I'm going to fire off everything in my hand just so I can get that Experimental Frenzy in play.
Viashino Pyromancer here will ding Nelson for 2 after a hit from 1 from that Lava Runner. Life total down to 17. History of Benalia on 3. Always where you want to be when 1's in your hand. So he's going to start off, you know, as best as he can start off here. For Selesnya Tokens, another Benalia in hand too. I love History of Benalia into History of Benalia, but is it good enough against the red deck?
Well, generally it is, but Martin's hand is extremely strong. He's going to now fire off a shock here on the token, attack with both creatures, and then play that light up the stage to see, you know, what he gets. So, I mean, Martin does have a really, really strong hand, but at the same time, so does Brad Nelson. He can follow up this history with another history. Then on the following turn, he can choose to either convoke out Venerated Loxodon or use Conclave Tribunal on that Experimental Frenzy we see in Martin's hand.
All right, so as you said, Shock takes down the token, in for some more damage, and here's a light up the stage from Juza, which is a way to give the red deck's card advantage, which is not something that I always have access to.
Yeah, and that's the really powerful thing about the Mono-Red deck currently in Standard is oftentimes previously in Mono-Red decks is, oh, out of burn spells,
yep,
I'm dead.
I lose.
You know, I got you to 4,
GG.
but, you know, good game, right? Now the red deck actually has staying power because it has such incredible card advantage engines in CHANDRA, Light Up the Stage, and Experimental Frenzy.
All right, let's take a look at what Brad Nelson is going to try and do. This is a pretty critical turn for him here on 14 life, but as you said, a lot of action in that hand.
Yeah, I think oftentimes what you want to be doing is running out the multiple History of Benalias, but I think Brad recognizing that 4/4 is very strong, but keep in mind, 4/4 not as strong after sideboard because the Mono-Red deck does sideboard in Lava Coil.
And here is something else the Mono-Red deck does after sideboarding, which is it goes bigger. Rekindling Phoenix here for Juza.
Definitely. And at some point, Brad Nelson will need to use some kind of removal effect. The nice thing is that the white decks have exile removal. Cards like Conclave Tribunal and Prison Realm permanently remove the Phoenix, meaning that it won't come back.
History of Benalia number 2 here for Brad. It's going to net him another Knight token. 5/4 now for the other Knight that popped from that History of Benalia on Chapter 3. And it looks like Conclave Tribunal. Clean answer here to the Phoenix.
Right. So now Brad has a very nice board here. Big attack here for 5, and then he has an additional Loxodon in hand. So now Martin it's weird. He wants to kind of play the control role here. He wants to use the removal spells in his hand, which he's likely going to do this turn. He's probably going to Lava Coil the Loxodon, Lightning Strike the 3/3 token, so that next turn he can just slam the Experimental Frenzy. And he got Brad to use that Conclave Tribunal on the Phoenix, meaning that the coast is even more clear to resolve something like
This is so bizarre. This is just an unusual play pattern for a red deck here. Kill off your creature so I can stabilize and get my card advantage going.
Yeah, well, you know, that's the thing. So that's what the red deck now has the ability to do. It can kind of shift gears and kind of play a more controlling deck because, you know, burn spells, they don't just go to the face. You can use them to kind of clear the board, and then ultimately you can just kind of take over the game with those cards like Frenzy and CHANDRA.
Isn't that unfair, though, Paul, to give red all those toys?
Yes.
I just have to call it out, you know. You need to answer for somebody in R&D over here.
Oh, right.
All right, so back over to Nelson here. Baffling End in hand, Venerated locks it on. Just going to pump up the team here. Doesn't seem like the greatest thing I've ever done.
Yeah, I imagine he wants to attack with the knight first. Oh, okay. Wait, did he attack? Did he attack with the 2/2 knight? I assume he did.
I can't remember. Well,
Right,
he's
right.
going to Baffling End here, taking out the Get-To Lava Runner, leaving himself with a 4/4 and a couple of 3/3s. And there's Chandra, Fire Artisan, and Experimental Frenzy. Which one do you want?
Usually it's going to be the Frenzy here. I think Martin's going to need to kind of put together multiple spells here to kind of come back here, because keep in mind, Brad has 10 power on the battlefield, and Martin's only at 13. So, you know, sure, Frenzy's going to get you a lot of cards, but Brad might just be able to close the door very quickly.
All right, so tough decision here for Martin Juza. Which one of the big bad 4-drops does he want to drop this turn? And it looks like it's going to be Experimental Frenzy, stranding the Chandra in his hand, essentially. Oh, maybe not. Taking a moment to think about it. In the end, the Frenzy is what's going to come down.
Ooh. Definitely don't want to see that. The old classic.
Oh, Frenzy into Frenzy.
Frenzy into Frenzy. I mean, keep in mind, to be fair, he only had 1 mana available, so probably wouldn't have been able to cast a whole lot of spells. But yeah, History of Benalia going off, so this was actually a
Huge
lethal attack.
Forcing a chump block there from Martin Juza, down to 4, and Get-To Lava Runner off the top of the library. Another Mountain and Goblin Chain Whirler.
Gotta
Okay,
keep it going.
we're
Gotta keep it
doing
going. Oh, there's another
Runaway
creature.
Steamkin. Okay. And this shows the power of something like Experimental Frenzy here. He was completely dead, Paul.
Right, absolutely. I mean, oh, but
Oh,
look at
nice.
this. Tristani off the top.
All right, Tristani discording, coming on in, making some more lifelink creatures, and another big attack
That
here
was
from Nelson.
such a big draw because every single creature is now a lethal attack. And also, before Tristani was drawn, Goblin Chain Whirler could have actually just eaten
you're
those
right.
3/3 knights. So now Martin is incredibly behind. It's going to be so hard. I mean, I think it's basically just over at this point.
Goblin Chain Whirler the draw, but that's not what we care about. It's the top of the library. Runaway Steamkin into Mountain, and that's all she wrote.
And that is the fail case for Frenzy when you hit land into land.
All right, so Brad Nelson wins that one, tying it up 1 game apiece here in our first match of the Spark Split Week 3 in the Emerald Division.
And now Martin on the play. Curious to see if he chooses the sideboard slightly differently here. You know, Tybalt, for example, is another option here. And it's a little bit better when you're on the play, when you can, you know, establish defenses a little bit better, not fall behind.
Yeah, this is interesting too. This is kind of where we get those razor-thin edges in sideboarding, making decisions based on if you're on the draw or on the play.
Exactly.
And it's something that you can look to at home to kind of level up your play if you're thinking, well, I'm good at sideboarding, but I want to get to that next level, thinking about stuff for games 2 and 3.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, oftentimes when people read articles and whatever, there's typically a sideboard guide, but oftentimes it just gives you kind of a flat thing.
Yeah.
You really do have to make sure you account for the fact whether or not you're on the play or the draw, because that really does affect how a lot of games play out.
All right, so we're on 6 here for Martin Juza. He kept a 1-lander. Get-To Lava Runner is hitting the table, and Brad Nelson looks like he has a pretty good hand going on here. Thorn Lieutenant seems to be like a pretty nice 2-drop against the red deck, starting things off with a flower, though.
Yeah, and this is kind of one of the adjustments that Brad Nelson has made. Oftentimes, Tithe Taker is the 2-mana card that a lot of these tokens actually used to play, but he's going with Thorn Lieutenant because kind of the de facto aggro deck of choice right now is kind of, you know, mono red, and Thorn Lieutenant is so well sized for that matchup. On top of that,
getting hit.
Right. On top of that, people are just playing less instants, so Tithe Taker's effect, Tithe Taker's text is not as strong, and also people are playing less sweepers, right? So you don't care about having Afterlife on your creature as
And
well.
look at this shock lining up against Thorn Lieutenant. Doesn't look good.
Things are going to be really rough here. I mean, this is an ideal start for Brad Nelson. He's got the turn 2 Thorn Lieutenant into history, locks it on.
Tristani.
And Tristani. He's got it all.
He's got the god hand, essentially, here.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so History of Benalia, no doubt here for Brad Nelson after that Thorn Lieutenant. Once again, giving him another token. It's a 2/2. And he can just sit back, have a nice day if he wants.
Exactly, and you know, Martin. And the thing with Martin's hand, it's so awkward because even if he draws a land, it's not even going to do anything for him. He needs to string together multiple lands in a row here to have a chance. But Brad's hand is completely stacked. You know, having that multiple History of Benalia draw while your opponent doesn't have the quickest draw, it's just so difficult.
All right, so Wizard's Lightning does help a little bit here for Martin Juza.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably going to use it here to get that Thorn Lieutenant off the
feels
battlefield
so bad.
so he can attack. It does, but, you know, it is what it is.
You gotta do what you gotta do. Just gonna pass the turn back over to Nelson. Chapter 2 on History of Benalia Fires. 4th land drop in the future for Brad.
And in the previous game, we did see Brad Nelson kind of go for Venerated Loxodon, overplaying a second History of Benalia. Curious to see what he does here. This attack tells me that he's likely going to just go for another history. But, you know, he still has the option to play out that Loxodon.
So Shock, first things first, is going to take out the token here from Martin Juza.
So I do like firing off that Shock there because that does prevent Brad Nelson from convoking out a Venerated Loxodon. So heads up play for Martin, understanding how this deck plays out, understanding how the matchup plays out, and unfortunately still, you know, looking very, very poor here because of that second History of Benalia.
So he uses the Wizard's Lightning to take down the token, leaving the Thorn Lieutenant alone, enables an attack with that Get to Lava Runner. Nelson down to 17. But here we go. Chapter 3 of one History of Benalia.
Oh, this turn is going to be ridiculous. And Venerated
hello.
Loxodon.
Wow.
Tristani into Venerated Loxodon. Keep in mind, Tristani effectively just cost 2 mana, right? Because it created 2 creatures, then that gave you the discount on the Venerated Loxodon. And at this point, it's just over.
Huge play there for Brad Nelson. Just an incredible board at this point, and nothing that Martin Juza can do. I wouldn't be surprised to see a concession here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, keep in mind, also, Lava Coil doesn't even do anything, right?
No, that Elephant's a 5/5 now. Thanks, Tristani. And here we go. Concession from Martin Juza. Brad Nelson takes down the match here, 2-1. Selesnya Tokens.
Yeah, definitely.
And that was our very first loss from Martin Juza in the MPL Weekly.
Yeah.
But somebody had to come out victorious, and Brad played very well.
Yeah, and absolutely. And Brad is just kind of, when you talk about what his biggest strengths are, it's identifying kind of what you expect in metagames. He's really good at pinpointing what people are going to bring to a tournament. That's why he's had so much Grand Prix success in the past.
Absolutely.
And he is considered a standard master. So it's not a surprise that he brought this deck that was tuned for a mono-red and also various Planeswalker strategies, and it really paid off when you see it here.
Awesome stuff. And you know, he said to me too, like, the reason I'm so good at Magic is my sideboarding skill, which is really interesting. So when we watch Brad, make sure to check out his sideboarding, because he really points to that as a reason why for some of his success.
Absolutely. I mean, you saw when he sideboarded there, you know, typically when you think about the card Legion's landing against Mono Red, you're like, well,
oh yeah, lifelink.
Yeah, you make a 1/1 lifelink token. That's got to be good against a burn deck. He's like, no, that's not the game I want to play. I want my
he may have expected the Tybalt to come out, meaning that lifelink would be useless.
And not only that, just the fact that a 1/1 body is just so irrelevant in the matchup, he wanted to make sure that all of his threats were just bigger creatures to be able to fight what the mono red deck was trying to do.
Deal with this.
Oh, also Dice to Chain Whirler.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be a constant running theme as long as Chain Whirler is going to be in standard. But if your creature dies to Chain Whirler, you're going to have to think about whether or not it's truly worth it to put those cards in your deck.
Definitely, definitely. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but then when we come back, we're going to see a match with Seth Manfield and GRZEGORZ KOWALSKI. How'd I do? Welcome back to the MPL Weekly. We're breaking down the notable matches of this week. Of course, they're all notable, but between our Magic Pro League players, I'm Becca Scott here with Paul and Maria. Hey, folks.
Hey,
Hello.
Hi.
pretty sweet match we just saw there.
We
Yeah, we
did,
did.
yeah. We saw Brad Nelson against Martin Juza. Juza took the first one, but Brad had the other two with those Selesnya tokens.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brad, you alluded to it earlier, just has just amazing sideboard plans. He knows what cards are not powerful, what cards are great, and he just made all these swaps that weren't necessarily conventional wisdom, and I mean that really paid off for him. Of course, on top of that, Martin did have kind of a weaker start, and Brad had very, very strong starts, right? Curving Thorn Lieutenant into double history. I mean, I can't
Sick.
tell you the number of times I've lost where my opponent goes turn 3 history. They just
History?
come in pairs. They just come
History?
together, and you're like history. Okay, well. Let's just right-click concede and just go to the next game.
And the lore was already told with
What's
all that
interesting
history.
to me, too, is that Mono-Red continues to be a thing, right? It's kind of the baseline of the field, and it's not going anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Mono-red is kind of the, in case the metagame goes completely off the wall.
It's the principal who's like, no,
Right.
get
It's
back
like,
in
yeah,
here.
yeah. It levels the playing field. It's like, okay. You guys are trying to really command the Dreadhorde and do all kinds of this wacky nonsense. Well, guess what? I'm going to beat you down and burn you with spells, so command the Dreadhorde doesn't do anything.
Keep you honest.
Yes.
Right.
And it's nice to see it really sing as it did in that first match. But now we're going to take a look at Seth Manfield and GRZEGORZ KOWALSKI. Let's see. So Seth also has an untarnished record in this MPL Weekly so far, 3-0. GRZEGORZ is a 2-1, but is the only player, I believe, who's playing DIMIR control.
That's
and
right.
Seth is once again showing that mono red we just saw with maybe a few variations. Let's hop into Seth's deck. And of course, we know Seth is a top finisher and has been for a little while now.
Yeah, Seth Manfield has consistently just been the top professional Magic player over the last, 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
I want to say. He's just picked up so many accolades in such a short period of
It's
time.
ridiculous.
Winning Pro Tours, winning World Championships. He's basically done it all.
And do we see any variation? It looks pretty much like Yuza's deck here.
Something interesting is that there's 3 copies of CHANDRA Fire Artisan and 3 copies of Experimental Frenzy, so he's got the full 6 here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Seth trying to play it getting a little bit greedier here, playing 6 copies of that powerful 4-mana card draw engine, and instead actually choosing to cut a 1-mana creature, which you don't really see. 3 Fanatical Firebrand, when you map out a deck, that's not kind of how you build your deck, but Seth is like, you know what? I really feel like most of the games that I'm going to win are going to come off the backs of CHANDRA and Experimental Frenzy, and actually chose to cut a Fanatical Firebrand here. But outside of that, of course, your typical suite of cards you'd expect from Mono Red.
And similar sideboard.
Yeah, Tybalt here, it looks like Seth's got the memo on that as well, so maybe we'll see it come in this matchup. I'm not sure. DIMIR Control doesn't seem to be like its number 1 hit.
Right, but at the same time, DIMIR Control does have multiple removal spells that gain life.
Let's see that DIMIR control.
Yeah, so I can see him considering that.
Okay. All right, DIMIR Control here from Greg Kowalski. God Eternal KEFNET, enter the God Eternals. My big question for you, Paul, here is why DIMIR Control? Why aren't we playing Esper Control? Why aren't we playing Jeskai Control?
So actually, Kowalski wrote an article the other day about why he chose to play DIMIR Control, and he says, well, number one, you have good mana, right? You're not taking a bunch of damage by playing all the shock lands, Hallowed Fountain, stuff like that, and then you also have the opportunity to play Blast Zone. On top of that, he just likes playing with a lot of these other sweet new cards that you get from War of the Spark. God Eternal KEFNET, he was highlighting as an extremely important card in this deck. It's just so good against both the aggressive decks because it's got such a huge body, but also just generates card advantage over time.
And it's impossible to deal with.
Yes, it is. It is nearly impossible to deal with. And then, of course, Enter the God Eternals is the card that he wanted to highlight as the absolute best card against aggressive decks. And it makes sense.
Absolutely.
5 mana, deal 4, gain 4, and get a 4/4. It basically does it all. So if he can stabilize and get to the point where he casts Enter the God Eternals, he is really, really happy about his creature matchups.
And something really quickly interesting is that that Elder spell in the main deck, by the way, we saw concessions to from Brad Nelson to Planeswalkers. Greg's thinking about it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here we have GRZEGORZ's sideboard.
Finale of Eternity, a 1-up in here.
Yeah, so just another way to kind of sweep the board. It's good against token strategies. I don't think it's realistic to kind of get to 10 here, the X equals 10 mode on the Finale of Eternity, but I think it's just another good removal spell to have in your repertoire. You also see the 4th copy of Enter the God Eternals makes sense because he identified it as the strongest card in creature matchups. And then you have, of course, your typical duress and all that stuff. I also want to talk about the 1 copy of Unmoored Ego. This is in case he runs into decks like Nexus of Fate, which he identified as kind of the deck's worst matchup.
Definitely. Now, I have a question for you because with God Eternal KEFNET, that's obviously a creature, a flying creature. And at what point do you call a control a mid? Because how many creatures do you need to have in your main deck before you call that a mid?
Well, I think generally you kind of look at how your decks play out in the early phases of the game. If you don't play, for example, a 2-mana creature, you're a control deck, basically. And that's what this deck is trying to do. It's trying to control the game with a bunch of cheap interaction, cards like Thought Erasure, Tyrant Scorn, and then you want to get to the point where you slam God Eternal KEFNET and kind of win the game with that card. And oftentimes in a control deck, the threats that you play are extremely difficult to deal with. So just typical spot removal is just not going to work. So cards like God Eternal KEFNET are the perfect way to kind of finish games in these control decks.
Absolutely. And a control deck for me is the funnest to watch because you get to see the most creativity and the most choice for the players.
Right.
So let's jump right into the game and watch MANFIELD versus KOWALSKI.
All right, Paul, who do you like in this matchup? I'm going to ask you right off the top.
You know, I'm not as familiar with the DIMIR control deck.
Oh, this is nice. They're saying hi to each other.
It's friendly chaps. But I want to say that I think I like KOWALSKI, actually, because he does have up to 4 copies of Enter the God Eternal after the sideboard, and you also saw 3 copies of Moment of Craving. All of these cards are excellent in this matchup. And in order for Seth to win, he's going to have to board in those Tybalts to prevent the life gain. And, I mean, he can still potentially win with cards like Experimental Frenzy because the blue-black deck actually has no answer for an enchantment.
Ritual of Soot in hand for KOWALSKI too, notably. Here's an opt from him. It's going to opt another opt onto the bottom of the library, draw out land. And a runaway Steamkin for Seth MANFIELD. Back over to Greg here, Drowned Catacomb, Swamp Island, and another Drowned Catacomb is land drops for turn, cast down in hand, a Thought Erasure as well.
So you can see KOWALSKI here tanking here, deciding whether or not he wants to fire off this Thought Erasure here, or just trying to preserve his life total by playing a cast down, because Seth is almost certainly going to be casting a spell here before attacking. All
right, so he's just going to pass the turn back, opting for the cast down play, and gosh, Runaway Steamkin just fills me with so much terror that I have to approve this play from Greg. All right, Steamkin and Fanatical Firebrand into the red zone for Seth MANFIELD.
And interesting, KOWALSKI choosing not to use cast down here.
Oh yeah, there he goes.
Oh, there it is.
Cast down taking care of the Runaway Steamkin. No response from MANFIELD, so Firebrand's going to get in for 1.
And Seth does have a light up the stage here, and he really just wants to piece together a couple of lands here because he wants to slam down the CHANDRA or Experimental Frenzy in hand. And another reason why KOWALSKI here chose not to use Thought Erasure is the most important thing is to make sure you fire off that Thought Erasure before the mono-red deck has access to 4 mana.
Okay.
Because that's the turn where they can play Experimental Frenzy and CHANDRA. So, you can kind of wait on it because you're not really concerned about the first 3 turns of the game because the only thing that the mono-red decks can do is just put creatures onto the battlefield. And if you look at his hand, he had the Ritual of Soot.
All right, so Thought Erasure here. What are you taking, Paul? That Experimental Frenzy, or are you more interested in CHANDRA?
I think the Experimental Frenzy.
Because you've got KEFNET.
Right, and it's just the scarier card overall. KOWALSKI does have ways to kill Planeswalkers, but he doesn't have a whole lot of ways to kill Experimental Frenzy. But given that Seth has so many 4-mana options here, I mean, it looks like he's also maybe considering a burn spell here, but I think Frenzy might be the one to go for. But yeah, he does
Lightning Strike.
He does go for the Lightning Strike here.
And Liliana is going to stay on the top of his library too. All right, back over to Seth MANFIELD here, continuing to chip in with that Fanatical Firebrand. Another Runaway Steamkin to replace the one we lost a couple of turns ago.
I imagine a Ritual of Soot. Oh, no, nope. He's going to see if Seth will overextend here and just run a KEFNET out instead because it is an excellent blocker. And Seth here, 2 huge draws, back-to-back lands here to be able to slam one of the 4-mana threats in hand, and I think it's going to be an Experimental Frenzy.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see what Seth decides to do here. In God Eternal KEFNET, now it's taken a kind of a minute to get into standard, Paul, but I'm really excited to see him here. I expected him to be in a kind of a blue-red aggressive spells deck, but finding him here in DIMIR control, he seems at home as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just in terms of the sizing, right? 4 mana, 4/5 flying, that's just a whole lot of value. It's just a very, very strong creature to have. In any matchup, right? And the fact that, you know, the 5th toughness is huge because it dodges removal spells like Lava Coil. So, yeah, I mean, when we were kind of designing this card, we kind of expected it to see play in a lot of different shells. You know, we thought it was even big enough where you might even see it in some mid-range decks, just as a 4-mana
Why
threat
not?
to play.
It's just a great creature.
Right.
Ritual of Soot here is going to do some cleanup work on Seth's board, and KEFNET's going to be able to get in there.
Yeah, but Kowalski had a pretty comfortable 15 life here. He does have that KEFNET and a Liliana to slam next turn, so we'll see. I mean, it's Frenzy time.
Yeah, here we go.
We'll see what happens.
Lightning Strike was what was on top here off the Experimental Frenzy. Going right to the dome. Ooh, nice one. Light up the stage here to follow up.
This is where you just kind of slap your hands together and you go, all right, what do we got? What do we got?
Once I saw Experimental Frenzy reveal an Experimental Frenzy, and then somehow another one, it was like a triple stack of them. It was very sad.
And look at this. I mean, Seth has found a Lightning Strike and a Shock. So now Kowalski's sitting at 10. And Seth's primary plan here, he can't win with creatures anymore. It's going to be very difficult with God Eternal KEFNET and Liliana. So he's just going to try to string together a bunch of burn spells and just kind of burn Kowalski out.
Fanatical Firebrand, though, able to get in, knocking Kowalski down to 9. But here we go. Liliana, Dread Horde General, hitting the table for Grzegorz Kowalski, creating a zombie.
And here you should expect an upkeep Shock here because he can cast that Shock. So it's going to be full control mode. We're going to see an upkeep Shock targeting Kowalski. I think Seth is firmly on the burn you out strategy here.
Kowalski down to 7.
He's now going to draw this mountain for turn, and let's see. Let's see what kind of burn we can find off the top.
All right, light up the stage. So we're going to have to sack this Fanatical Firebrand.
Yeah, he's going to sack the fire. He could have hardcast it, but this gives you the discount here.
Yep.
And really, Seth just wants to continue churning through his deck to find the final few points of burn to end this game. Because Kowalski, I mean, he's getting close. He's getting close to being able to finish this off.
Light up the stage here. Draws him some cards. That's a Goblin Chain Whirler on top. Kowalski at 6 life, which is a really critical number for the red deck because a lot of times it means 2 burn spells.
Right.
Here's Goblin Chain Whirler, knocking him down to 5. And a Shock off the top. Oh my god.
It doesn't stop. And Kowalski is now going to go down to 3. So any 3 damage burn spell will be the game here for Seth MANFIELD. Kowalski really needs to find a way to gain life. If he can draw Enter the God Eternals off the top, that would be huge.
All right, let's find out what happens. It's an opt. It's an
opt. He can copy it.
He can copy it, so he can has a couple more chances to find it here.
If he can find and Enter the God Eternals, that is the card that he wants. Not that one.
Spell's not going to do it.
Not that one.
Tucks that down to the bottom of the library. Draws a Watery Grave.
So he's probably going to fire off another opt here to really try to find this Enter the God Eternals.
This is where, you know, the red deck says, you know what, you can brew and make all these crazy new decks you want, but guess what I'm going to do? Burn your face.
Yeah, well, the red deck does one thing, and it only does one thing. It cares not for what their opponent's trying to do.
No.
I'm going to play these burn spells and go straight to the face.
Greg taking a little bit here on the decision, but keep in mind that Enter the God Eternals does cost 5 mana.
Yeah, so one thing that I also want to point out, though, is Seth doesn't actually need to top deck a 3 damage burn spell. If you notice, he does have a Wizard's Lighting in hand. So what he can do is end of turn Shock, and then he can actually just sacrifice the Experimental Frenzy that he has in play, and then use the Wizard's Lighting for lethal damage. So Greg Kowalski needs to find... That actually works.
Interesting. The negate can save him for a little bit.
Exactly. That actually works. He can use the negate here to counter a potential 3 damage burn spell.
So taking a moment to think about this decision, and he decides, well, you know what? It's good enough in a pinch. I'm not going to roll the dice here. Blasts on the land play. And God Eternal KEFNET continuing to keep the beats coming because we've got to win some way. You can't protect a loss.
I wonder what he's going to do with this Liliana. Okay, he's going to make a token.
Okay.
I thought he might consider minusing because that would give him 2 additional draws.
Sure.
Because he would lose 2 of his creatures, kill Goblin Chain Whirler, and you know he might be in a better position to gain the life. But Looks like he just wants to make tokens here to chump block and find cards.
Shock takes Greg down to 3.
All right.
Here we go. Here is Seth's going to go for it, no doubt.
Oh,
and it was on the top anyway!
He doesn't even matter. Okay, so he does. So Kowalski does have the negate here for this one.
But here comes negate for
you
this
think he's going to negate here, Maria?
I think he just might, Paul.
I'm in the
I think he
expert
might.
seat here, but I'm not sure.
He just might.
Okay.
Watch out! I'm going for your job. All right, so negate here going to counter this lightning strike. But as we all know, there is the ability to destroy your own experimental frenzy and more burn in hand for Manfield.
But Seth doesn't have the ability to sacrifice Frenzy and play Wizard's Lightning this turn.
So he's going to have to be a little bit patient here, which is not something red players are used to hearing, but...
Yeah, well, I just assume Seth will just make whatever optimal play that he needs to. So Seth can just choose to cast the Light Up the Stage here for 3 mana. He does have a land drop that he can play with the land that's exiled from a previous Light Up the Stage. And if he does find another Lightning Strike or something, he could just use that to win.
So we'll see if Seth Manfield decides to go for it here. Looks like he is going to play that Light Up the Stage. Finds a Get to Lava Runner on top.
Okay, so he has the ability to play Mountain double Lava Runner, but Kowalski can block Chain Whirler and a 2/2.
Yeah.
So Kowalski will go down to 1.
1.
1, not 0.
1 is not 0, Paul.
All right, what do we find? What are the other cards here?
Oh, it's a Viashino Pyromancer.
Okay,
all right.
He's getting really close, but keep in mind, Seth Manfield is at 8. God Eternal KEFNET is a 2-turn clock.
And if he finds Enter the God Eternals, that swings it back around.
Absolutely.
Keep in mind that Liliana, too, to do some cleanup work. All right, so we have the land in play, the possibility of a land drop here for Manfield, as you mentioned, 2 Get to Lava Runners. Goblin Chain Whirler on the offensive.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so he's not he does actually want to get those creatures off the battlefield here. I think he's doing this in case Kowalski chooses to go for the -4 ability on Liliana. And by forcing Kowalski to chump block here, if he minuses with Liliana, he would lose the God Eternal KEFNET.
Liliana's static here. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card, finds a Search for Escanta off the top of Kowalski's library.
Really close decision here for Seth. He can play the Pyromancer, put Kowalski down to 1. Then next turn, he can sacrifice Experimental Frenzy and cast Wizard's Lightning for the win.
All right, here's Viashino Pyromancer for Manfield.
All
right, down to 1.
Kowalski needs another negate, a life gain effect.
Let's take up his Blast Zone, though.
I don't think he can. He can use Blast Zone to sacrifice it to kill the Pyromancer.
Oh, no way!
Enter the God Eternals and keep in mind it's being revealed. So he gets the discount, he gets to cast it for 3, and then he gets to cast it again.
Nice is right, Seth. Nice is right. And we just talked about this. We're like, this would be able to get him out of it. And here it is. Enter the God Eternals copied with KEFNET. What an amazing draw for GRZEGORZ Kowalski.
Yeah, and at this point, now this will shut the door, but wow, what a draw.
Oh, that was incredible. All right, so we're going to take down the Goblin Chain Whirler, and just for good measure, we're going to do it again. Enter the God Eternals #2 here for Greg, taking down the Pyromancer, gaining 4 life, and amassing. That's now an 8/8.
I mean, I guess theoretically, Seth could find like 3 lightning strikes off the top in a row here. Kowalski is at 9, but wow, I mean, it's going to be extremely unlikely here. And look at this, that's an 8/8 token. And I mean, we have what, like 16 power on the battlefield.
Oh, yeah.
What a draw there for Kowalski.
Playing it safe here, it looks like, with just the 1 attack.
Yeah. Because he doesn't have a lethal attack this turn, there's really no reason to attack with that other 2/2.
Great point. Viashino Pyromancer on the top here for Seth Manfield, but wow. Looks like the door has slammed fully shut for him.
Okay, so I wonder if Seth is going to run out that Steam Can to try to kind of go off with the Frenzy and just try to string together
that would be sweet.
A very unlikely string of cards to try to burn out Kowalski. And it looks like he is. He's like, all right, I'm playing to my outs here. This is how I'm going to win.
All right, so here comes the Steamkin. Here comes the Pyromancer.
Okay.
Down to 7.
And Gitu Lava, any 1-mana card is a wash in terms of mana, right? Because the Runaway Steamkin, every time you remove 3 counters, you get 3 mana.
Get to Lava Runner, another counter on the Steamkin, Goblin Chain Whirler off the top.
That's an expensive spell, so now he's going to play that Gitu Lava Runner that's been exiled here with the Light Up the Stage. That will put Runaway Steamkin to 3 counters. He can then use the 3 counters to cast Goblin Chain Whirler, but that would get KOWALSKI down to 6. If he has, what, I guess 2 Wizards Lightning off the top might do it.
All right, there's Goblin Chain Whirler. There's a land.
Okay, there's the land.
Oh, nope. It's another land.
Wow, but I mean, what a close game, what a huge turnaround there.
So cool. So an amazing draw there for Greg KOWALSKI with Enter the God Eternals, the MVP for this matchup. You mentioned it at the beginning as being one of the keys to his potential victory here in this matchup. And look at what it's done for him. It's completely got him back into the game.
Yeah, definitely. And all we're gonna. I don't even know what KOWALSKI's thinking about here. All he needs to do is attack with that flyer and get in for the final few points. But this is what the best players do, though. They look at,
absolutely.
You know, they're like they're in a position where they're like, I can't possibly lose. What
but
can
how
they
can
have?
I lose?
What's the worst case scenario at any given point here? So I mean, that's just all KOWALSKI is doing, just to make sure that he 100% has lethal attack.
Somebody that I think is just a model for me on careful play is Reed Duke. Watching him play, he thinks about every decision. He's super careful about everything that he does, even if there's like at home you're thinking he has absolutely no chance. You know what I mean? So that's something I can learn from because I'm a very fast player.
Yeah.
All right, so there we go. Game number 1 going to Gregor KOWALSKI here with DIMIR Control. Let's take a peek at Seth Manfield's sideboarding.
Yeah, so Direfleet Daredevil is an easy inclusion. I think Legion Warboss and Tybalt are also cards that you'd like to bring in this matchup, just because Legion Warboss is really nice after a sweeper, but it doesn't look like he's actually bringing that in.
A lot of people have talked about the Legion Warboss as being something critical to bring in against a lot of Planeswalkers as something that's good for pressuring them. So it's interesting that Seth's got that ready in the sideboard too.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes sense to board out Shock. Shock doesn't really do a whole lot.
Right.
You want actually permanents that could do that can deal multiple damage over the course of a game. And it looks like he also took out some copies of Runaway Steamkin here, which is pretty interesting because that in conjunction with Frenzy is very, very strong. But you know, this is the plan that Seth is going for. And he even brought in Fight with Fire because Fight with Fire deals 5 damage. That is a way to kill KEFNET. So
That's true.
For you know, a few turns before it comes back.
And we talk about red going bigger after board, and Fight with Fire is one of those ways that we do that that's not in the form of a creature in something like Rekindling Phoenix. All right, let's take a peek here at what Greg decides to do. Oh, we'll have to be in suspense. Here we go. Game 2 is ready.
Yeah, I imagine Moment of Craving.
Yes, yes, I think that's
the 4th copy of Enter the God Eternals, also a card that probably came in.
All right, so here we go. Game number 2. Greg up a game over Seth here in this match. All right, Moment of Craving in hand. Finale of Eternity came in from the board, notably, which seems pretty good in this matchup as well.
Yep, just additional removal. KOWALSKI has plenty of less than stellar cards, but it looks like Seth here on a mulligan.
Yep. One land only. And
KOWALSKI has an excellent start here.
Yes.
Look at all the cheap interaction. He's got Duress, Opt, Moment of Craving, and Tyrant Scorn.
What are you going to lead off with, Duress or Opt?
Well, there's not really anything you're too afraid of your opponent casting next turn. Or sorry, with Duress over the first couple turns. I mentioned that it's really important to make sure you have Duress for turn 4. But at the same time, I mean...
Might as well.
He can just fire it off here, and the next turn have access to a removal spell in case Seth plays something like, you know, any number of creatures that he has in his deck.
So Experimental Frenzy and Light Up the Stage, the 2 options here for KOWALSKI. Are you just taking that Frenzy?
I mean, normally I would lean towards taking the Frenzy, but, you know, we saw in the previous game where KOWALSKI chose and took the Lightning Strike off the Thought Erasure.
He's just going to play it safe and take the Frenzy despite the mana issues for Manfield, and in fact finds a second land here.
Yeah, second land off the top is huge. And Seth, you see that Direfleet Daredevil.
Yeah,
that's going to be really, really strong. If he draws land number 3, he can play Direfleet Daredevil to cast Duress in KOWALSKI's graveyard to be able to get, you know, the 6 spells that he has in his hand.
Moment of Craving here is going to gain KOWALSKI some life, back up to 20, take down the Pyromancer, and Seth drawn lands like a champ here, regular John Avon. And here's the play that he could make with Direfleet Daredevil and the Duress, or he could choose to go with that Goblin Chain Whirler.
Yeah, Direfleet Daredevil makes a lot of sense here. It just gives you perfect information in terms of how you're supposed to play out this game.
There we go.
Interesting to see what he's going to take here.
Yeah.
He could go for the, I'm going to try to mana screw you strategy and take the opt here so that, you know, Kowalski can't string together a bunch of lands. But of course, if the game does go long, I mean, it's going to be really hard to beat the life gain that you get from both Vraska's Contempt and Enter the God Eternals.
So where do you put the weight, Paul?
I mean, it's a close call. I mean, we'll have to take a look. Seth Manfield's hand is currently Goblin Chain Whirler and Light Up the Stage. But, you know, we saw the work that Enter the God Eternals did, and he is going for the I hope you don't draw land strategy, taking the opt.
But GRZEGORZ Kowalski does, in fact, draw land. There's an island off the top. Tyrant Scorn castable as well.
Seth might hit him with a nice here if Kowalski
Ooh,
plays
I
out
hope
this
so.
land.
I love it, though. Like, that's a play that I wouldn't expect an MPL member to make. Be like, haha, stay mana screwed. I'm going to take your opt.
Yeah. Oftentimes, the whole try to mana screw your opponent strategy is something that people think, you know, maybe not the top-level pros would be doing. But, I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
It is a strategy here.
I mean, it makes sense to some degree if you think about it. I mean, Kowalski's hand does really need mana to function, and Seth did mulligan, so he needs to just try to kind of steal a game here.
Another land off the top for Seth Manfield. Into combat here, Direfleet Daredevil.
I might actually probably look to Tyrant Scorn here on the Direfleet Daredevil in case Seth has something like a Light Up the Stage. You don't want to give him the discount there on the Spectacle for Light Up the Stage. Little does Kowalski know, Seth just has it all here. He actually drew the land so he can go Goblin Chain Whirler into Spectacle Light Up the Stage, which is a huge turn for him.
Here's the Chain Whirler, here's the land, and here's the Light Up the Stage to refill the hand here for Seth Manfield.
Ooh, nice.
Oh, and by the way, Thought Erasure, not going to get those cards. Those two cards are exiled. And Kowalski did not find land number 4. He did not find the black mana that he needs to be able to cast that Vraska's Contempt, and he's still pretty far away from the Enter the God Eternals. He might actually fire off Thought Erasure just to surveil to make sure that he hits his land drops.
Yeah.
And I don't think he wants that up. He needs to naturally draw a swamp here to actually be competitive in this game.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people struggle with. They would keep the opt on top because they're like, well, I'm getting another look.
Right. But it's one of those things, it's like, if Seth Manfield plays another threat next turn, if you take a turn off to opt and not actually play anything else, are you realistically going to win that game?
Sure.
So it's interesting to see. But, you know, keep in mind, though, Kowalski is currently sitting at 19. Maybe he thinks he can afford to put the opt on top. But no, it looks like he does choose to bin it here and really just hopes to naturally draw Black Source here.
How about an Experimental Frenzy for Seth Manfield? These draws have been gas.
Oh my goodness, this is amazing. Remember,
whitelist.
The blue and black colors has no real good way to deal with an enchantment. And this time around, there is no KEFNET. There is no pressure on Seth Manfield. So he can just go to town with Experimental Frenzy. And I think you really just want to fire it off this turn because you know it's going to resolve. And you know that the blue-black deck just doesn't have any good answer to that Frenzy.
And there it is, Experimental Frenzy here for Seth Manfield. He's going to lose those cards, but that's okay. That's what Experimental Frenzy does best. And a Thought Erasure for tiny value here.
Oh, no. And this is not a black source, but it is a land. So, you know, this is land number 4, which puts him in a better position to draw a black source to be able to cast Enter the God Eternals turn 4. Or, sorry, the next turn after that. But I don't know. This is also tough. It's like he specifically wants Swamp.
I think I got to keep it, though. Live in hope of the Enter the God Eternals, but it's really a dicey decision there.
Yeah, and here we go. Experimental Frenzy doing its thing here. Lightning Strike.
Get to Lava Runner. It has haste. Here's a land. Ooh, Tybalt on top. That could be pretty good given what's in Greg's hand.
And, ooh, okay. I thought Seth might just fire up that Light Up the Stage. Oh, no, he can, of course.
No.
Experimental Frenzy in play. Right.
So back over to Seth Manfield, able to knock Kowalski down to 8. Vioshino Pyromancer off the top, pretty good too.
Yeah, this is
just an embarrassment of riches, really.
And that is the game here. Kowalski does not have another removal spell. Multiple burn spells off the top here.
Good game from Kowalski, and that is Seth Manfield taking game number 2, all tied up here as we head for game number 3, Mono-Red Aggro versus DIMIR Control.
Yeah, and Seth there, mulliganing, keeping a one-lander, but ultimately getting there. Kowalski had a nice opening hand, but he really needed to find that second black source. He needed to string together some lands. But keep in mind, he was on the draw. He's playing a deck with 26 lands. or 25, and he had opt. He had basically all everything he needed there. I wonder if the game would have played out slightly differently if he chose to lead with opt instead of duress, just to make sure that he hits his land drops.
Interesting here, hostage taker in the deck for KOWALSKI, which I think sometimes like, oh, isn't that a teeny bit of a liability because it dies to so many things in Seth's deck, but maybe he just is able to cast it because his creatures are so cheap. So
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you might just have enough bad cards in the matchup where you're like, you know what, a 4-mana 2/3 creature might be good.
Yeah.
You know, if he does randomly steal Direfleet Daredevil and then cast it, he could actually maybe get additional value that way as well.
Here's a look at Seth's opening hand here for game number 3. Looks pretty good.
1-drop, 2-drop, fight with fire, and 4s. Yeah, that seems like a pretty nice keep.
And we're on a mulligan here for KOWALSKI. He's going to keep that swamp on top because we were swamp light last game.
Having nightmares of the last game, making sure that he hits his land drops here by keeping the swamp on top.
The drawn catacomb, a little bit brutal, unable to cast that duress, coming in tapped. And here's Fanatical Firebrand for Manfield.
I imagine a Thought Erasure is going to come here from KOWALSKI.
Here it is. Thought Erasure taking a peek at Seth's hand. What are you taking?
Well, he doesn't have a removal spell in hand. He might just want to take that Virashino Pyromancer because it is, a source of damage, and it enters the battlefield and also deals additional damage. And if he wants to kind of stem the bleeding, he might want to just take that because he doesn't have a removal spell next turn. He only has that Vraska's Contempt. However, on the other side, if he does take Experimental Frenzy or Chandra this turn, next turn he can use the Duress to get rid of both of the big 4-mana spells in Seth Manfield's hand.
That's a great point. And do you think that the decision really hinges on him having a second way to peek and steal something from Seth's hand here?
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah. Given that he's got the Duress in hand, it does make sense to go for the Frenzy here.
A lot of times people talk about ignoring if you see a redundant threat in somebody's hand off of
yeah, but you lose to all of these threats, so you still need to find answers to all of them. Right.
All right, we're back over to Seth Manfield. Fanatical Firebrand in play, 1 in hand as well. Get 2 Lava Runner and a second Mountain.
And Seth just deciding whether or not he wants to play the 2 1-drops in his hand or run out that Virashino Pyromancer.
All right, looks like it's going to be the pair of 1-drops. Fanatical Firebrand getting in and get to Lava Runner after attacks as it doesn't have haste. And all right, enter the God Eternals here for Greg, and that's been a key card for him as we've seen in this match.
Yeah, and he's looking very, very well set up here, right? Because next turn he has Vraska's Contempt mana, so he will be able to contempt the Virashino Pyromancer. Sure, he's going to take some damage here, but it's not that much.
All things considered, yeah, it's just 3.
Yeah, but however, Seth does draw Tibalt here, so if he can find land number 3 and slam Tibalt, that Enter the God Eternals at the very least will not gain KOWALSKI that crucial 4 points of life.
Here's Pyromancer to hit Greg for another 2 points of damage. Down to 12.
Down to 12, we have 5 points, so yeah, KOWALSKI does need to string some stuff together, but he does have the life gain here, but Seth, even if he draws land number 3, oh, he's going for the main phase here.
Wow.
So Seth really wants land number 3 here to slam Tibalt.
And what does he draw? It's land!
It's a land.
All right.
But still.
It's still not great.
Right. But I mean, the thing is, given that Seth has that fight with fire, he does also have the answer to the 4/4.
Yeah, you're right.
Right? So KOWALSKI now needs to string together multiple things here to have, to be able to line up things perfectly. And now you see the power of Tibalt.
Yeah.
That static ability, players can't gain life, is huge because gaining 4 life is the difference between just a full card in the mono-red deck. That negates a Lightning Strike. That negates a Wizard's Lightning.
And it's so interesting, too, these static abilities on these Planeswalkers sometimes turning out to be the most important part of them. Tibalt, a great example here. Narset is another one that comes to mind.
Yeah, and you can also see another heads-up sideboard card that Seth Manfield brought in. He brought in that fight with fire to not only deal with KEFNET, but also dealing with the 4/4 amass tokens created by Enter the God Eternals.
All right, so we're up to 5 mana here for KOWALSKI. Passing back over, okay.
So the reason why KOWALSKI chose to do this is he knows that Seth Manfield has a fight with fire in hand because of a previous hand disruption spell that he cast.
So he's like, why do it?
So he's like, why do it? I'm gonna wait. Instead, I'm just gonna use this cast down on probably the Gitu Lava Runner because it has the highest upside. It can be potentially a 2-2, and then just wait for a future turn.
Tybalt here making another Devil Friend. And an attack here from Seth Manfield is imminent. Getting in with the team. Cast down from KOWALSKI on the Gitu Lava Runner, just as you said.
Yeah, Kowalski wants something like a Cry of the Carnarium here
Ooh,
to
that
deal
would be
with
sick.
all of these tokens.
Down to 8 life. Seth Manfield still sitting at a comfortable 20. Passes the turn back over. And there's God Eternal KEFNET.
Yeah, but Seth
But
is...
it's that fight with fire.
Right, Fight with Fire doing a lot of work here, and look at Seth. Seth is in a position here where he has 4 creatures that can attack. He's got 3 mana in play. He's got the answer to any of the threats Kowalski can play, and also if he draws land number 4, he can just slam Chandra Fire Artisan as well.
And Experimental Frenzy, so whatever he wants. And here's Fight with Fire on God Eternal KEFNET to keep the beats coming for Seth Manfield. Down goes the God, tuck it into the owner's library, 3rd from the top. If he wants.
If he wants.
All right, so it's going back into the library. The advantage of being a god. In for 4. KOWALSKI down to 4. Draws a land for the turn.
But I think Kowalski is just dead here because he can cast Enter the God. Wait, let's see. So he can cast Enter. Oh, no, he's not quite. So he can cast Enter the God Eternals on Fanatical Firebrand, and then if he blocks one of the devils, he will take 2 from the unblocked creatures and 1 from the devil.
Oh,
so
sure.
not
Go down to 1 again.
100% dead yet, but getting very close.
He's not dead yet.
Yeah.
All right, a 4/4 army token for KOWALSKI. Light up the stage was the draw here for Seth Manfield.
So really interesting here. Now, does Seth Manfield want to play the burn game? He can sack Fanatical Firebrand to deal 1, and then Spectacle light up the stage and try to find a lightning strike or something like that, or just attack with all the creatures. This does mean that there is a chance that Tybalt can die next turn with the 4/4, and if Kowalski draws Enter the God Eternals number 2, he could gain some life.
Yeah, and in fact, he doesn't find anything just yet. Land number 4, though, for next turn could turn out to be pretty good, but
this should be the game.
Yeah.
This should be the game. There's 2 devils. Keep in mind, those devils, when they die, they deal 1 damage to any target. So all Seth Manfield has to do now is attack with both of the devils.
Yep.
Kowalski will block both of them and just use the death triggers on both of them to finish off Kowalski.
wow, Tybalt being the planeswalker nobody loved to being... All right.
The Planeswalker Kowalski doesn't love. Yeah.
Here we go, attack with the 2 devils. No good answer to this. Ping, ping, you're dead. KOWALSKI life total down to 0, and that is match going to Seth Manfield and Mono-Red.
And that puts Manfield at 4-0 in the MPL Weekly. Very impressive showing from Seth Manfield. And his username is really fun. Bit of trivia about Seth. It's Bridge Backwards, because his father was a competitive bridge player.
So is his mother, in fact.
Really?
Yeah, a whole family of
Well, so,
competitive bridge
it's a
players.
family of card-playing pros,
Yes.
and so it's no surprise that Seth is just one of the best players. Even in this group of the best players in the world, I think Seth is still considered one of the favorites here to kind of win. And, he's showing it. He's 4-0, and he's really just been bringing this mono-red deck week after week
Yes,
and
he
just doing a
has.
lot of work with it.
Very impressive. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, that trashing that opt, which seemed like maybe not the long-term strategy in game 2, seemed to really work out well.
Yeah. I mean, Seth, with that mulligan, he identified, okay, the best way that I'm going to win here is to just prevent Kowalski to get to land number 5. And the best way to do that is to take that up to make sure that Kowalski can't find the lands that he needs. Because if Kowalski in that game, if he just goes land like
No, he's
Island
fine.
Swamp, he's in a totally great position there. But by taking the opt, he kind of prevented any of that from happening.
And Kowalski writing that article was really wonderful, just saying how each matchup, how he sees it, and why he chose DIMIR. That was a great read for me. Learned a lot from that. We do have the Emerald standings if we want to take a look over there.
Hello everyone, Corbin Hostler here to recap this week's action in the Emerald Division. Just because Alexander Hayne and Christian Hauck were on the wrong end of the standings coming into this week, well, that didn't stop them from turning in a great match. Alex brought the spice this week with a crazy 4-color brew featuring Command the Dreadhordes, which allowed him to go over the top of pretty much any deck in Standard. Unfortunately for him, Hauck was more interested in going underneath with Mono-Red Aggro. That meant that Hayne would be playing from the back foot the entire match. But that was no problem in the first game as he played an absolutely devastating Massacre Girl and rode to victory from there. Now Hauk's deck did what it does in the next one, taking down Alexander Hayne on turn 4, but that set the stage for the decider. Finally, Hayne had the chance to show what his deck was built to do. He repeatedly cleared the board and then followed up with Command the Dreadhorde. He stole a pair of creatures from Hauk, and that was the victory coming for Alexander Hayne there. He moved to 2-2 with the win. That keeps the front runners of the division in his sights as we move into the last few weeks of the split. Now, the other match of the week was Shota Yasuoka and Matt Nass, who both entered 0-3 so far. The big moment here came in the first game when Nass, who by the way was playing a pretty spicy DIMIR Soul Diviner Planeswalker brew himself, well, he landed Liliana Dreadhorde General to protect his Narset and to try to close out the game from there. But Yasuoka had an absolutely devastating Casualties of War that cleared the board and changed the game on the spot. From there, the Hall of Famer would go on to Ultimate Vivian Reed and close out the game. Game 2 was the classic Golgari beatdown, and with it, Shota got on the board, taking down Matt Nass 2-0. Now, there's still a long way to go and a lot of Magic left to be played, so it looks like we're going to be in for a pretty exciting finish here in the Emerald Division.
I'm glad we got to see that fast motion Casualties of War. That seems to be a great thing, a reason to bring a Golgari deck.
And this is what all the Japanese players are on this week.
Right, yeah. When I took a look at the deck list, all the Japanese players looked like they all teamed up.
They've
They're like,
conspired.
we're also going to go with a land destruction strategy here, with Casualties of War kind of being the top-end threat. Everybody's playing Command the Dreadhorde, but the Japanese players went a different route with their 6-mana big black sorcery of choice. They went with Casualties of War, which, you know, does a lot of work in this environment because so many decks are just so heavy on Planeswalkers that oftentimes Casualties of War for 6 mana is going to get you 3 permanents, because usually you're going to get creatures, lands, and Planeswalkers now at this point.
Now, we will get to see one of those Golgaris later because Ken Yukihiro has brought it, but right now, we're going to take a look at the standings for Emerald. At the end of week 3 here, ooh, Brad Nelson 4-0 along with Seth Manfield.
I've got to say that, Paul, this is like no surprise, right? If you had to call it, you know, from week 1.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, we have Shota Yasuoka at 1-3.
That's true.
You know, it's one of those things, too, where, I mean,
they're all great.
We're talking about, again, the best players out there. And so at some point, some of the best players that we know are going to be 4-0, and the other players will have a poor record. So, you know, there's going to be multiple splits. But right now, yes, Brad Nelson, kind of known as the standard juggernaut. He understands standard inside and out. Not a big surprise that he's 4-0. And, of course, Seth Manfield also just being one of the best players in the field, also sitting at 4-0.
And, you know, Corbin, we just heard from with that division wrap-up in Emerald, actually wrote a really cool article about being a dad and playing Magic that included Seth Manfield here and kind of how to balance those two kinds of things in your life, which was really neat.
And the answer is aggression all the time? No, not with children. What's really interesting?
Well, I mean, to be fair, he did just submit Mono-Red Aggro.
Yeah,
So he's like,
exactly.
I'm just going to submit Mono-Red Aggro so I can play with my daughter.
I got diapers to change, you know.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is that Seth chose Mono-Red, has stuck with Mono-Red, and some of those players that are lower down in the standing have done more experimental, more testing metagame kind of decks. So it's more fun for us to watch those things that we haven't seen.
You know what's interesting, though, is the players who have stuck with Mono-Red, it's the players who have stuck with Mono-Red who have stuck with the deck throughout the 3 weeks. It's generally the Mono-Red players.
Well, yeah, and also it's one of those things. I mean, you can never really go wrong with playing Mono-Red. It's got a very strong linear aggressive strategy. But I actually think, at least specifically for this week, it's even better positioned because a lot of players brought these Command the Dreadhorde decks, right? Where Command the Dreadhorde, you need to use your life as a resource to get back your permanents. But if the red deck is putting you at 8-6 life before you can even cast it, it doesn't even do a whole lot.
And you're just messing around the whole time anyway until you can hit your combo. So, like,
exactly.
Punish you.
You're just kind of just playing cards at random, putting them all into your graveyard, and then casting a huge Command the Dreadhorde. So really excited to see one of those decks in action you know, at some point later on
And
today.
we definitely will later on. But right now we're going to go to a quick break. And then when we come back, Paulo Vitor Dama de Rosa against Mike Sigrist. Stay tuned.